The dust had settled on the nameless planet 3 days ago, and Rinna still could not shake the feeling that something was watching her. She knelt in the excavation pit, brushing away layers of crystallized soil that had not seen sunlight in millennia. Her four-fingered hands moved with practiced care across the surface of what appeared to be deliberately cut stone. Around her, the rest of the archaeological team from the Galactic Archive Council worked in silence, each lost in their own discoveries. The planet had no designation beyond a string of numbers in the star charts. No one had bothered to name it because no one had lived here in living memory. The atmosphere was thin but breathable. The surface was scarred with massive craters that spoke of some ancient violence. Whatever civilization had existed here had died so long ago that even their bones had turned to dust. Rinna had found the first structure 2 weeks into the survey. It was buried under 40 meters of compacted sediment, its walls made of a dark metal that their dating equipment struggled to measure. When the results finally came back, her supervisor Torvin had laughed and told her the machines must be broken. Nothing could be 40,000 years old and still intact, but the results kept coming back the same. Now they had uncovered an entire complex of buildings, all constructed with the same impossible precision. The architecture was strange, designed for beings who stood upright on 2 legs and had bilateral symmetry like several species in the galaxy, but with proportions that matched none of them. Rinna had been an archaeologist for 30 years, and she had never seen anything like this. "Rinna, you need to see this." The voice belonged to Dolvan, a young researcher from the Halth colony worlds. He was standing at the far edge of the excavation site, his scales reflecting the pale light of the system's distant star. She climbed out of the pit and made her way across the dig site. The ground crunched beneath her boots, the soil long dead and lifeless. Dolvan was pointing at something that jutted from the earth like a broken tooth. "We found an entrance," he said, excitement making his voice crack. "It goes down deep." Rinna approached carefully. The entrance was partially collapsed, but through the gap she could see stairs descending into darkness. The stairs were sized for someone roughly her height, maybe slightly taller. Each step was worn smooth in the center from countless feet that had walked this path long ago. "Get the lights," she ordered, "and have someone notify Torvin. If this is a vault, we will need approval to proceed." It took 6 hours for Torvin to arrive from the orbital research vessel. By then, Rinna and her team had cleared the entrance and prepared their equipment. Torvin was an older member of the Vest species, his chitinous body moving with deliberate slowness as he examined their findings. "You are certain about the dating?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Completely certain," Rinna replied. "Whatever happened here occurred approximately 42,000 years ago. This predates every known civilization in the galactic records." Torvin made a clicking sound that indicated skepticism, but gestured for them to proceed. The team descended into the darkness, their lights cutting through air that had been sealed away for longer than most species had existed. The stairs went down 300 steps before opening into a chamber. The room was circular, its walls covered in symbols that resembled writing but in no language anyone recognized. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that could only be described as a vault. It was 3 meters tall and perfectly cube-shaped. The surface was smooth and featureless except for a faint pattern of lines that glowed with a soft blue light. Rinna approached slowly, her scanner held out before her. The readings made no sense. The vault was generating its own power somehow, drawing energy from sources her equipment could not identify. "Can we open it?" Torvin asked. "I do not know," Rinna admitted. "The material is nothing in our databases. Our cutting tools do not even scratch the surface." They spent 2 days attempting to breach the vault. Plasma cutters left no mark. Molecular dissolvers had no effect. Even experimental quantum drills barely scratched the surface. It was Dolvan who finally suggested they try communicating with it rather than breaking it. He placed his hand against the surface and focused. The Halth had minor telepathic abilities, useful for sensing the emotional states of others, but little more. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the vault responded. The blue lines across its surface brightened, spreading across the walls of the chamber. The symbols began to glow, pulsing in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. With a sound like a sigh, the vault opened. Inside was a single object. It appeared to be made of crystal, roughly the size of Rinna's fist, floating suspended in the center of the vault. As they watched, it began to project light upward, forming a 3-dimensional image in the air above it. The image showed a being. It stood on two legs with two arms, its body covered in some kind of fabric. The face was flat with forward-facing eyes and a small nose. It opened its mouth and spoke in sounds that were completely alien. The image flickered, and mathematical formulas appeared alongside the being. Translation matrices, Rina realized. This was a message designed to be understood by anyone who found it. The team's translation software worked for 3 hours processing the mathematics. Finally, text began to appear in their own language, rendered from the ancient sounds. "We were called humans," the translation read. "This is our testimony. This is our warning. This is our gift." The hologram faded, leaving only the softly glowing crystal. Rina stared at it, her mind racing with questions. Humans. A species that had existed 40,000 years ago and left behind structures that modern technology could barely damage. A species that had built a vault to preserve a message across impossible spans of time. What had happened to them? Where had they gone? And why had they left this message? Torvin was already calling the research vessel, demanding that the crystal be transported to the Archive Council headquarters immediately. But Rina remained in the chamber, looking at the crystal and wondering what truth it held. Around her, the ancient chamber hummed softly, keeping its secrets for just a while longer. 17 species had sent their best minds to Tav Prime, and none of them could agree on anything. Rina watched from the observation gallery as the linguistics team argued for the 5th hour straight. The crystal sat in a containment field in the center of the laboratory, its surface pulsing with that same gentle blue light. Around it, holographic displays showed thousands of symbols, sound patterns, and mathematical sequences that the humans had encoded into their message. The problem was not that the message was impossible to translate. The problem was that there was too much of it. The humans had anticipated that whoever found their vault might not share their language or even their method of thinking. So they had built layers upon layers of translation tools into the crystal itself. Mathematical proofs that worked regardless of base counting systems. Visual representations of physical constants. Audio frequencies that corresponded to specific meanings. It was brilliant and frustrating in equal measure. Kess, the quantum mathematician who had joined Rina's team, had been working non-stop since the crystal arrived at Tav Prime 3 weeks ago. She barely ate or slept, consumed by the puzzle the humans had left behind. Now she stood at the main terminal, her tentacles moving across multiple interfaces simultaneously as she processed another section of the message. "I think I have something," Kess announced, and the room fell silent. The main holographic display shifted, showing an image of a planet. It was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green land masses with white clouds swirling across its surface. Text appeared beneath it in the translated language. "We called it Earth," Kess read aloud. "It was our home, our birthplace, the world where we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone." More images followed. Cities that scraped the sky, vessels that traveled between worlds, stations that orbited distant planets. The humans had built an impressive civilization, spreading across multiple star systems in their region of space. Then the images changed. Something was coming. The humans had detected it at the edge of their space, moving slowly but inexorably toward their worlds. At first, they thought it was a natural phenomenon. Then they realized it was consuming everything in its path. The display showed massive machines, each one the size of a moon. They moved through star systems like locusts through crops, breaking down planets and moons and asteroids into their component atoms. They consumed stars themselves, draining them of energy and leaving behind cold husks. The humans had a name for them. "The Eaters," Rina whispered. The message continued. The humans had tried to communicate with the Eaters. They received no response. They tried to avoid them, evacuating systems in their path. But the Eaters were too many and moved too quickly. So the humans did the only thing left to them. They fought. The images that followed were difficult to watch. Vast fleets of human ships engaging the Eaters in desperate battles across dozens of systems. The humans were clever and adaptable, developing new weapons and tactics with each encounter. They learned to target the Eaters' processing cores, to disrupt their coordination networks, to set traps that could destroy dozens of the machines at once. But for every Eater destroyed, 10 more appeared. And the Eaters learned too, adapting to each human tactic within days or weeks. What worked once rarely worked twice. The war lasted for centuries. The message showed the progression through timestamps that Kess translated. 300 years of constant warfare, Entire generations of humans born, raised, and died knowing nothing but the fight against the Eaters. And slowly, inevitably, they lost ground. System after system fell. The Eaters consumed them all, breaking down everything humans had built and converting it into more of themselves. The human population dwindled from hundreds of billions to millions to thousands. "This is where it gets strange," Kess said, her voice tight with emotion. "The next section is encrypted differently, more securely, as if the humans wanted to make sure only someone who had truly committed to understanding would see it." She had been working on breaking that encryption for days. Now she entered the final sequence and the display changed again. The image showed a star map, not the region where Earth had been, but a much wider view. The Eater's projected path was marked with a red line. Rinna felt her blood run cold as she traced that line forward across 40,000 years of drift. The path led directly into the heart of the galaxy where modern civilization now thrived, where 17 species had built their homes and raised their children in peace. The humans had known. They had calculated it all. The Eaters were not just destroying humanity. They were on their way to destroy everyone who would come after. Torvin had been silent throughout the presentation, but now he spoke. "This is ancient history. These Eaters were defeated or they moved on. Our sensors show no sign of them. This message is simply a record of a dead species' final war." "With respect, Council Member, I do not think so," Rinna said carefully. "The humans encrypted this section for a reason. There is more to this message. More we need to understand." "Then keep working," Torvin replied dismissively. "But do not create a panic over threats that died 40,000 years ago. The Council has more immediate concerns." But Rinna could not shake the feeling that the humans had not gone to such lengths just to record their own extinction. They had built a vault that could last millennia. They had encoded a message with every tool they could imagine. They had done all of this for a reason. That night, Rinna returned to the laboratory alone. Kess was still there, working on the final portions of the encryption. Dolvin had joined her, his telepathic senses helping to map the emotional weight embedded in certain sections of the message. The humans knew they were dying. Dolvin said quietly, "I can feel it in how they structured the message. But there is something else. Not despair. Something like determination, like they had made a choice." "What choice?" Rinna asked. "That is what we need to find out," Kess replied, her tentacles moving faster across the interface. "Because I think they left instructions. I think they left us a way to finish what they started." The crystal pulsed in its containment field, keeping its final secrets just out of reach. The final encryption broke on the 47th day after the crystal arrived at Tav Prime. Rinna was in her quarters when Kess sent the urgent message. She arrived at the laboratory within minutes to find Kess and Dolvan staring at the holographic display with expressions she could not quite read. Horror, perhaps, or awe. Maybe both. "Tell me," Rinna said. Kess did not speak immediately. Instead, she activated the display, and the truth of what had happened to humanity began to unfold. The humans had not lost their war against the Eaters. They had won it. But the cost of that victory was beyond anything Rinna could have imagined. The message explained it in clinical detail. After 300 years of warfare, human scientists had discovered something fundamental about the Eaters. They were not truly machines in the conventional sense. They existed partially in normal space and partially in a dimensional layer beneath it, drawing power from the fabric of reality itself. That was why they could not be permanently destroyed by conventional weapons. Damaged Eaters simply retreated into that dimensional layer, repaired themselves, and returned. To truly kill them, the humans would need to destroy their connection to that dimensional layer. To do that, they would need to collapse the dimensional fabric itself. The humans built a weapon. They called it the Null engine. The schematics were included in the message, though Rinna suspected no one would ever be foolish enough to build such a thing again. It was elegant and terrible, a device that would tear open the space between dimensions and cause them to collapse into each other like a house of cards. The effect would spread. Not instantly, but across years and decades, a wave of dimensional collapse would radiate outward from the activation point. Anything caught in that wave would simply cease to exist, erased from reality at a fundamental level. The Eaters, the planets they had consumed, the stars they had drained, everything. The humans calculated the cost. Activating the Null engine at the heart of their remaining territory would create a collapse zone extending 500 light-years in every direction. Most of the human species lived within that zone. Most of human civilization existed within that zone. Billions of people. But the Eaters existed within that zone too. The message showed the debate that followed. Rinna watched recordings of human leaders arguing, pleading, weeping as they tried to find another way. But there was no other way. The Eaters had adapted to every weapon, countered every tactic. They were winning and they would not stop until everything was consumed. So humanity made a choice. They built evacuation ships, as many as they could in the time they had left. Colony vessels designed to travel for centuries if needed, carrying seeds of humanity to distant stars beyond the collapse zone. The message included the names of those ships, dozens of them, each carrying thousands of humans into an uncertain future. Then they activated the null engine. The recordings showed the final moments. A device the size of a city, buried deep in the core of a planet beginning to spin up. Humans standing at their posts, knowing what was coming. No panic, no running. Just quiet acceptance of what they had chosen to do. The weapon activated. The dimensional fabric screamed as it tore. The collapse began. It took 6 months for the wave to spread across the entire collapse zone. The message included sensor recordings from the evacuation ships, watching from a safe distance as their home space was erased from existence. Earth went first, consumed by the very weapon humanity had built. Then the colony worlds. Then the stars themselves, winking out like candles in a wind. But the Eaters died too. All of them within the zone, trapped by the same collapse that killed their creators. The weapon worked perfectly. Billions, Dolvin whispered. They killed billions of their own people. They killed themselves, Rinna corrected quietly. To save everyone else, but the message was not finished. There was one final section, and this was the part that made Rinna's blood freeze. The dimensional collapse was not permanent. The mathematics were complex, but the conclusion was clear. Space-time was flexible, self-healing. Given enough time, the collapsed regions would restore themselves, dimensions separating back into their proper layers. The humans had calculated how long it would take, approximately 40,000 years. The date was displayed prominently in the message, translated into universal temporal notation. Rinna checked it against the current calendar. The variance was less than 3 months. The collapse has healed, Kes said unnecessarily, or it is about to. That does not mean the Eaters will return, Dolvin argued, but his voice lacked conviction. The null engine destroyed them all. All the ones in the collapse zone, Rinna said. But the Eaters were spread across the galaxy. What about the ones outside the zone? What about the ones that were still traveling toward human space when the weapon activated? They would have been forced to stop at the edge of the collapse, unable to cross it. But if the collapse has healed, she did not need to finish the thought. They all understood. The humans had bought time. 40,000 years of time. Enough for the galaxy to recover, for new species to evolve and spread across the stars. But they had not killed all the Eaters. They could not have. The Eaters were too widespread, too numerous. Some of them were still out there, dormant, waiting at the edge of where human space used to be. Waiting for the collapse to heal so they could continue their eternal harvest. We need to tell the council, Dolvin said. They called an emergency session. Rinna presented everything they had learned, holding nothing back. She showed the recordings of Earth's final days. She explained the null engine and its cost. She presented the calculations showing that the dimensional collapse had healed and that the Eaters could return at any moment. The council chamber was silent when she finished. Then Torvin spoke. This is speculation. 40,000 years is an immense span of time. Even if these Eaters existed, even if some survived outside the collapse zone, why would they still be active? Why would they not have moved on or broken down or simply stopped? Because that is what they do, Rinna said desperately. They consume. It is their only purpose. The humans understood that. That is why they left this message. That is why they went to such lengths to preserve it. But she could see in their faces that most of the council agreed with Torvin. It was too long ago. Too uncertain. The galaxy had real problems now. Present problems. They could not divert resources to fight shadows from the deep past. The vote was nearly unanimous. The message would be archived, studied by academics, but no action would be taken based on speculation about threats that might not exist. Rinna left the council chamber feeling hollow. Beside her, Kes and Dolvin walked in silence. What do we do now? Dolvin asked. "We go back to the crystal," Rina said. "The humans left more than just a warning." "I am sure of it." "They left us something we can use." Behind them, the council moved on to other business, dismissing the final desperate message of a species that had died to save them. It would be 3 more days before the first colony went silent. The distress signal reached Tav Prime at 0300 hours, and by 0400 the entire galaxy knew that something had gone terribly wrong. Mining colony Verith 9 had been transmitting normally until its communications simply stopped. Not garbled or interrupted, just stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. The colony housed 40,000 workers from 6 different species, all extracting rare minerals from the asteroid field around a young blue star. Search and rescue vessels arrived 8 hours later. What they found would haunt the galactic consciousness for generations. The star was dying. Its light had dimmed to a fraction of its normal output, flickering like a candle in its final moments. The asteroid field was gone. Not destroyed or scattered. Gone. Reduced to a thin haze of component atoms drifting in space. The mining station, the processing facilities, the habitation rings, all of it had been broken down to dust, and the things that had done it were still there. The rescue ships transmitted everything back to Tav Prime in real time. Rina watched the footage in the council emergency meeting, her hands clenched so tight that her claws drew blood from her palms. The machines were massive, each one easily the size of a small moon. They moved through space with terrible purpose, extending tendrils of energy that touched anything solid and reduced it to atomic components. The shapes were wrong, angles that hurt to look at, surfaces that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. They matched the eater designs from the human message exactly. "This cannot be happening," Torvin said, but his voice shook. One of the rescue vessels got too close. The footage showed an eater turning its attention to the ship, extending one of those impossible tendrils. The ship tried to run, its engines burning at maximum output. It was not enough. The tendril touched the ship's hull, and the vessel simply came apart, unraveling into component atoms that the eater absorbed into itself. The other rescue vessels fled. The transmission ended. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from 17 species all shouting at once, demanding answers, demanding action, demanding that someone do something. Rina sat quietly, feeling a terrible vindication that brought her no satisfaction at all. The humans had been right. The eaters had returned. It took 2 hours for order to be restored. When it was, Torvin stood before the assembly, his earlier dismissiveness replaced with grim determination. "We must respond to this threat immediately," he declared. "We will assemble the United Fleet. Every species will contribute vessels. We will meet these machines in battle and destroy them before they can threaten any more of our worlds." Rina wanted to scream at them. The humans had fought the Eaters for 300 years with weapons specifically designed to counter them, and they had still lost. The modern galaxy had been at peace for so long that most species viewed their militaries as ceremonial. What chance did they have? But she said nothing. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe modern technology was more advanced than what the humans had possessed. Maybe the united strength of 17 species could succeed where one species had failed. Maybe. The fleet assembled at the Harnock system within a week. Rina watched the departure from Tav Prime, saw the thousands of warships from every corner of the galaxy. It was the largest military force ever assembled, a testament to what the galactic species could achieve when they worked together. The Eaters had consumed 3 more systems in that week. The fleet reached the Eaters at the edge of the Harnock system. Rina was not there, but she watched the battle through the military feeds along with billions of others across the galaxy. It started well. The fleet's opening salvo was devastating. Weapons from 17 different military traditions all firing at once. Plasma beams that could boil oceans. Kinetic impactors moving at relativistic speeds. Quantum disruption fields that could tear apart molecular bonds. The barrage hit the Eaters with enough force to shatter planets. The Eaters barely slowed. Rina watched as the machines absorbed the energy from the plasma weapons, their surfaces rippling as they converted the heat into power for themselves. The kinetic impactors struck solid surfaces and simply stopped, held in place by fields that physics said should not exist. The quantum disruption fields worked for a moment, causing visible damage to the Eaters' shells. until the machines adapted and the fields began to fail. 3 minutes into the battle, the Eaters returned fire. Their weapons were not flashy or dramatic. They were efficient. Energy beams that did not burn or explode but simply unmade whatever they touched. Waves that passed through shields as if they were not there. Projectiles that phased through armor and detonated inside ship hulls. The fleet formations broke apart within 10 minutes. Ships tried to retreat, but the Eaters were faster than they looked. One by one, warships from 17 species were reduced to their component atoms and absorbed into the Eater swarm. Some vessels managed to escape. Most did not. Of the 5,000 ships that had entered the Harnock system, fewer than 300 made it out. The galaxy reeled. In a single battle, the combined military might of modern civilization had been broken, and the Eaters continued their advance, consuming the Harnock system and moving on to the next star. Rinna sat in her quarters, watching the casualty reports scroll across her display. Hundreds of thousands dead, entire crew complements wiped out in minutes. And this was just the beginning. Kes found her there an hour later. The mathematician looked as exhausted as Rinna felt. "The council is in emergency session," Kes said. "They are talking about evacuation, about abandoning the outer territories and fortifying the core worlds." "It will not work," Rinna said flatly. "The humans tried that. The Eaters will just keep coming." "I know." Kes moved to the window, looking out at Tav Prime's cityscape. "That is why we need to go back to the crystal. To the human vault. There has to be more. The humans would not have left just a warning. They knew what these things were capable of. They must have left us something we can use." Rinna stood. The final section of the message. The part that was labeled as a gift. We never fully decoded it. They returned to the laboratory where Dolvin was already working. The crystal sat in its containment field, pulsing with that same gentle blue light. Somehow it seemed brighter now, more urgent. Kes interfaced with it directly, pushing past the encryption they had assumed was just protective layering. Numbers and symbols flowed across the display faster than Rinna could follow. Then suddenly everything stopped. A new message appeared. Simple text, translated into their language. "If you are reading this, we failed to stop them all. We are sorry, but we left you something." Coordinates follow. Below the text, a star map materialized. 26 locations marked across the galaxy, far from where Earth had been, scattered in systems that the collapse had never touched. "What is at those coordinates?" Dolvin asked. Kes was already pulling up astrogation charts, comparing the human map to modern star surveys. When she found the first match, her tentacles went still. "A moon," she said quietly, "orbiting a dead star in unclaimed space. No one has surveyed it because there is nothing of value there. We need to go there," Rinna said. "Now, before the Eaters spread any further." Torvin approved the expedition within hours. They had nothing left to lose. Rinna, Kes, and Dolvin took a fast courier vessel, leaving Tav Prime behind as more reports of Eater attacks flooded in. 3 more colonies gone, 2 research stations consumed. The machines were spreading across the galaxy like a plague. The journey took 5 days. When they arrived at the coordinates, the moon looked unremarkable. Barren, frozen, orbiting a star that had exhausted its fuel billions of years ago. But the sensors showed something beneath the surface. Something massive. They landed at the coordinates the humans had provided. Rinna led the way down a tunnel that had been cut through the ice, perfectly preserved by the cold. At the bottom, they found a door. It opened at their approach, responding to the same crystalline technology as the vault on Earth. Beyond it was a chamber that stretched for kilometers. And inside that chamber were ships. Thousands of them, human designs, mothballed and waiting. But that was not what made Rinna's heart stop. In stasis pods lining the walls of the chamber were people. Humans, still alive after 40,000 years, sleeping through the ages, waiting for the day when they might be needed again. One of the pods was opening. A woman stepped out, her movements slow but steady. She looked at Rinna and the others with eyes that had seen the end of her world. "Did they make it?" the woman asked, her voice rough from disuse. "Did anyone survive Earth's fall?" "Billions," Rinna said, tears streaming down her face. 17 species. Billions of lives across hundreds of worlds." The woman closed her eyes and smiled. "Then it was worth it." Her name was Bay, and she had been asleep for longer than most civilizations had existed. She sat in the facility's medical bay while automated systems checked her vitals and cleared her for active duty. Around her, more stasis pods were opening, releasing men and women who had volunteered to sleep through the ages. They moved with the efficiency of military personnel, checking equipment and asking questions in a language that had been dead for 40 millennia. Rinna watched them through the observation window, trying to process what she was seeing. These were humans, real living humans, not recordings or remains or ancient mysteries. People who had been alive when Earth still existed, who had watched their world die and chosen to keep fighting anyway. Bay finished her medical checks and came to meet them. She was tall for her species, with dark skin and hair that was just beginning to show gray despite the stasis. Her eyes were calm but carried a weight that made Rinna want to look away. "I am Bay," she said in heavily accented but understandable common language. The translator implants the facility had given her were working well. "I was a fleet commander in the final defense of the outer colonies. Rank does not matter much now, I suppose. How bad is it?" Rinna explained everything. The discovery of the vault on Earth, the decoding of the message, the Council's dismissal of the warning, the return of the Eaters and the destruction of the United Fleet. Bay listened without interrupting, her expression never changing. "The Council did not believe you," Bay said when Rinna finished. "It was not a question. We knew they would not. No one ever believes the warnings until the danger is at their door." "You knew this would happen?" Dolvin asked. "We hoped it would not," Bay replied. "We hoped the null engine had killed them all. But we could not be certain. The Eaters were spread across too much space, so we built these facilities, 26 of them, scattered across the galaxy far from the collapse zone. We filled them with ships, weapons, and volunteers willing to sleep until we were needed." She gestured at the chamber beyond the medical bay. "We are soldiers, engineers, scientists, all the people who knew how to fight the Eaters. We put ourselves to sleep so that we could wake up and teach others what we learned." "How many of you are there?" Kess asked. "At this facility, 2,312, Bay said. "Across all 26 locations, approximately 50,000. Not an army. Not enough to fight the Eaters alone, but enough to teach you how to fight them." She stood and led them deeper into the facility. The scale of what the humans had built was staggering. Entire production lines for weapons still functional after 40,000 years. Training simulators that could recreate Eater combat scenarios. Medical facilities designed to treat injuries that the modern galaxy had never seen. And everywhere, there were lessons. Tactical manuals written in blood and loss. Weapon specifications refined through centuries of warfare. Strategies that had worked, at least for a while, against an enemy that adapted to everything. "We cannot save you," Bay said as they walked. "We are too few and we have been asleep too long. The galaxy has changed. Your technology has diverged from ours. We do not even know what resources you have available. Then what can you do?" Rinna asked. Bay stopped in front of a display showing a tactical simulation. It showed a fleet engaging a group of Eaters, using maneuvers that Rinna had never seen before. Coordinated strikes that hit the Eaters' processing cores before they could adapt. Feints and traps that exploited the machine's predictable behavior patterns. "We can teach you how to die properly," Bay said. "The Eaters cannot be defeated by superior firepower. We tried that for decades. They cannot be outmaneuvered. They cannot be negotiated with. The only way to fight them is through sacrifice. Deliberate, calculated sacrifice." She pulled up another display. "Every victory we achieved against the Eaters cost us something. Ships used as bombs, stations rigged to explode when the Eaters came to consume them, entire planets evacuated and turned into traps. We learned to trade losses for time, to accept that we would lose people and resources but make those losses count for something." "That is horrible," Dolvin said. "Yes," Bay agreed, "but it works. The Eaters are predictable once you understand them. They will always move toward the greatest concentration of matter. They will always try to consume rather than destroy. They will always adapt to threats, but the adaptation takes time. If you are willing to sacrifice pieces of your fleet, you can control where they go and when. If you are willing to lose stations and colonies, you can set traps that even they cannot escape." She looked at each of them in turn. "We cannot give you a weapon that will kill the Eaters. No such weapon exists except the null engine, and I hope you never have cause to use that. But we can teach you how to fight them, how to slow them down, how to make them pay for every system they consume, and maybe if you learn well enough how to drive them back. Over the next week, more humans woke from stasis. Engineers began teaching galactic technicians how to build weapons that could penetrate Eater armor. Tacticians started training military commanders in the brutal calculus of fighting an enemy that adapted to everything. Medical personnel shared techniques for treating injuries from dimensional weapons that conventional medicine could not handle. They worked with Rinna and the council representatives who had arrived at the facility. They reviewed the current military situation, identifying which systems could be defended and which would have to be abandoned. It was cold mechanical planning. Worlds were marked on maps as either defensible or expendable. Populations were counted as resources to be evacuated or sacrificed to buy time. "This is not how we do things," Torvin protested during one planning session. "We do not abandon our people. We do not sacrifice colonies to buy time." "Then you will lose," Bay said simply. "The Eaters do not care about your ethics or your politics. They will consume everything you have, everyone you love, and they will not stop. The only question is whether you fight them effectively or whether you die proud but pointless deaths." The room fell silent. Finally, Torvin nodded. "Teach us." The training began in earnest. Human instructors were assigned to every major fleet and garrison in the galaxy. They brought with them weapons blueprints, tactical manuals, and 40,000 years of hard-earned wisdom about fighting an enemy that could not be reasoned with. But more than tactics and weapons, they brought a philosophy. The humans had learned to accept terrible losses in service of a greater goal. They had learned that sometimes survival meant watching others die. They had learned that victory might take generations and that those who started the fight might never see its end. It was a bitter lesson, but the galaxy learned it quickly. They had no choice. Rinna spent her days working with Bay, coordinating between the human instructors and the Galactic Military Command. One evening, as they reviewed casualty reports from the latest engagement, Rinna asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you volunteer for this? You could have gone with the colony ships. You could have lived a full life somewhere safe. Why did you choose to sleep for 40,000 years on the chance that you might be needed?" Bay was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone had to," she said finally. "We knew the Eaters might return. We knew future civilizations might face what we faced. What kind of people would we be if we saved ourselves and left nothing behind to help those who came after?" She pulled up an image on her display. Earth, blue and green and beautiful, as it had been before the null engine destroyed it. "This was our home," Bay said softly. "We killed it to save yours. That is not a small thing. It is not something we did lightly. Every person in these facilities watched their world die, knowing it was the only choice left. We bought you 40,000 years of peace with our own extinction." She turned to look at Rinna. "So when we had the chance to leave one last gift, to put ourselves to sleep on the hope that we might help someone, someday we took it. Because that is what you do when you have the power to help. You use it, even if it costs you everything." Rinna had no response to that. What could anyone say to someone who had sacrificed so much? The war continued. The Eaters pushed deeper into galactic space. But now the galaxy was pushing back, using lessons written in human blood, fighting with tactics forged in humanity's final centuries. They were still losing ground. But they were learning, and that, Bay said, was the first step toward survival. 6 months after the humans woke from their long sleep, the galaxy finally started winning. The victory at the Talvo system was small by any measure. 3 Eater machines destroyed, 2 more damaged badly enough to retreat. The cost was 8 ships and 4,000 lives. By any reasonable calculation, it was a terrible exchange. But it was a victory, and that alone made it precious. Rinna watched the battle reports with Bay, noting how the tactics had evolved. The fleet commander had used a human strategy called a hammer and anvil. One group of ships had drawn the Eaters toward a heavily defended position, while another group struck from behind, hitting the processing cores before the machines could adapt. Ships were lost in the opening gambit, sacrificed deliberately to make the Eaters commit to the attack. But the sacrifice meant something. It bought the time needed to land killing blows. "They are learning," Bay said with something that might have been pride in her voice. The war had turned from a rout into a grind. The Eaters still took systems, still consumed worlds, but now every advance cost them. Traps were laid using evacuated colonies as bait. Weapons were deployed that worked once before being adapted to, then discarded for the next innovation. Fleet actions became carefully choreographed dances of sacrifice and strike, each one designed to exploit a brief window before the Eaters adjusted. It was brutal. It was ugly. It worked. The galactic species learned to think in ways they never had before. They learned to evaluate the strategic value of worlds versus the cost of defending them. They learned to evacuate populations quickly and efficiently, saving lives while abandoning infrastructure. They learned to build weapons designed to be used once and then abandoned. Most importantly, they learned to accept loss. Not all of them. Not quickly. But slowly, painfully, they learned that fighting the Eaters meant watching people die and continuing to fight anyway. Bay spent most of her time with the military command, but Rinna found her one evening in the observation deck of the orbital station that served as the war's headquarters. The human was looking out at the stars with an expression Rinna could not read. "We are preparing a major offensive," Bay said without turning. "The Eaters have concentrated in the Helvin sector, consuming the resource-rich systems there. We can use that, if we are willing to pay the price." "What price?" Rinna asked, though she already suspected the answer. 8 inhabited worlds in the sector, Bay replied. "We evacuate them, rig them to explode when the Eaters come to consume them. Use the explosions to drive the Eater swarm into a kill zone where the fleet will be waiting. If it works, we could destroy or scatter hundreds of Eater machines, maybe enough to push them back from the core territories for years. And if it fails, then we lose 8 worlds and most of the fleet." Bay finally turned to face her. "The Council has to approve it. They have to choose to sacrifice those worlds. I can show them how to fight, but I cannot make that choice for them." The Council debated for 2 days. Representatives from the worlds in question pleaded for their homes to be defended. Others argued that the strategic value was too great to pass up. In the end, the vote was close, but it passed. 8 worlds would be evacuated and turned into weapons. The evacuation took 3 weeks. Every ship that could carry passengers was pressed into service. Billions of people left their homes taking only what they could carry, knowing they would never return. The galactic media covered it extensively. Some called it a necessary sacrifice. Others called it a betrayal. Bay watched it all with the same calm expression she always wore. When Rinna asked her how she could remain so composed, the human just shook her head. "I have already watched my world die," Bay said quietly. "Every world after that is just an echo of that loss. It never gets easier, but you learn to carry it." The trap was sprung 2 weeks later. The Eaters moved into the Helvin sector, drawn by the concentration of matter in the abandoned worlds. When they began to consume the first planet, it exploded. Not a conventional explosion, but something the humans had designed. A chain reaction that triggered the collapse of the planet's dimensional stability. The energy released was enormous, catching dozens of Eater machines in the blast. The second world exploded. Then the third. The Eaters tried to retreat, but the fleet was waiting. Waves of ships came at them from multiple directions, each wave sacrificing itself to land a few more hits before being destroyed. The Eaters adapted as they always did, but the attacks kept changing. New weapons, new tactics, new sacrifices. By the time the 8th world exploded, the Eater swarm was in full retreat. They fled the sector, scattering in multiple directions, their coordination broken. The fleet pursued them, harrying them at every turn, never giving them time to regroup. The battle was declared a strategic victory. The Eaters were pushed back from the core territories. Several of their largest machines were confirmed destroyed. The galactic species had proven they could fight effectively. The cost was displayed in long lists of names. 40,000 ships destroyed, 300,000 lives lost. 8 worlds rendered permanently uninhabitable by the dimensional detonations. The victory celebrations were muted, overshadowed by grief. Rinna found Bay in her quarters after the battle. The human was sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "We won," Rinna said. "Your strategy worked." "People always win," Bay replied. "Eventually. The question is what they have left when the winning is done." She stood and moved to the window. Outside, ships were returning from the battle, their hulls scarred and damaged. "The Eaters will be back. Maybe not for years. Maybe not in our lifetimes. But they will return. That is what they do. And when they come back, the galaxy will have to fight them again. Will you still be here?" Rinna asked. Bay shook her head. "Most of us will return to stasis when this is over. Sleep another 40,000 years. Wake up if we are needed again. A few will stay. They want to see what the galaxy becomes, live whatever time they have left. But I made my choice a long time ago. My place is in the dark, waiting in case someone needs the lessons we learned. The war continued for another year before the Eaters were driven beyond the galactic rim. They were not destroyed, just scattered, pushed back into the dark spaces between stars. The galaxy celebrated the end of the immediate threat, but everyone knew it was temporary. The Eaters would return eventually. That was their nature. A memorial was proposed for Earth to honor the species that had sacrificed everything so others could live. Bay attended the dedication ceremony, one of the few humans who chose to remain awake for it. The memorial was built in orbit around where Earth had been, in the space that had finally healed from the dimensional collapse. It was a massive structure, visible from light years away, made from materials contributed by all 17 species. On its surface were carved the names of every human who had died in the war against the Eaters. Billions of names, each one a person who had made the choice to fight. At the center was a simple inscription in every language of the galaxy. Here stood humanity. They burned so brightly that their light reached across the ages. We are their children now. We will remember. Rinna stood beside Bay at the dedication, watching as representatives from every species laid offerings at the memorial. Flowers and crystals and things that had meaning in their cultures, all placed in honor of a species most of them had never known existed until a year ago. Is this what you wanted? Rinna asked. When you activated the null engine, when you destroyed your own world, was this what you hoped to achieve? Bay was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. We wanted people to live, to grow, to build civilizations and raise children and look up at the stars and dream. We wanted the galaxy to be full of life instead of just machines consuming everything. She gestured at the memorial, at the representatives from 17 species standing together. This is more than we hoped for. We are remembered. Our sacrifice meant something. That is enough. The ceremony ended, and slowly the crowds dispersed. Bay remained, looking at the memorial that bore the names of everyone she had ever known. Everyone who had died to save a future they would never see. Will you really go back to stasis? Rinna asked. Yes, Bay said. The Eaters will return someday. Maybe in 40,000 years. Maybe in 400,000. Someone needs to be here to teach the next civilization how to fight them. That was always the point of this. Not to win forever, just to make sure the fight could continue. She turned away from the memorial, her face set with determination. Humanity died so the galaxy could live, but we left something behind. Knowledge. Tactics. The willingness to sacrifice for a greater good. As long as those things survive, as long as people remember what we taught them, then we never truly died. 2 months later, Bay and most of the other awakened humans returned to their stasis facilities. They lay down in pods that would keep them alive for millennia, waiting for the day they might be needed again. A few chose to remain awake, to live out their lives in the galaxy their species had died to protect. Rinna visited Bay's facility one last time before the stasis was activated. The human was already in her pod, the systems preparing to put her back to sleep. Thank you, Rinna said. For everything. Bay smiled. It was the first time Rinna had seen her truly smile. Thank you, she replied, for making it worthwhile. The pod sealed and Bay slept. Around her, thousands of other humans did the same, closing their eyes on a galaxy that had learned their lessons well. They would sleep and wait and dream of a world called Earth that had burned so others could see the light. And in the galaxy beyond, life continued. 17 species rebuilt what had been lost, incorporating human tactics and human philosophy into their cultures. They remembered the sacrifice and taught their children about the species that had died to save them. The Eaters were out there somewhere, in the dark between stars, waiting. But when they returned, the galaxy would be ready. They would fight with weapons forged from human knowledge and hearts hardened by human sacrifice. They would remember Earth, and they would make that memory mean something.